It was a quiet Sunday evening in a small American neighborhood. You know, the kind of evening where the world just seems to slow down. Families were wrapping up their day, the scent of dinner was fading from the air, and the streets were almost empty, peaceful. But for one young boy, the quiet was anything but calming. His name was Mason, barely 12 years old, and he was walking down the edge of the street, a knot of nervousness and confusion tightening in his stomach. In his hand, he clutched a crumpled piece of paper with an address scribbled on it. It was his friend's house. They had a big school project due, and tonight was their last chance to get it done. Mason had been so sure he knew the way. He'd biked past this neighborhood a dozen times. But walking was different. The landmarks he thought he knew had vanished. As Mason walked from one identical-looking house to another, a cold dread began to creep in. He had definitely taken a wrong turn somewhere. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, but the beautiful sight only made him feel more anxious. The streetlights flickered on, one by one, casting long, spooky shadows that danced around his feet. He reached into his pocket for his phone, his last hope. The screen was black, dead, of course. Why hadn't he charged it? Panic started to bubble up. The street signs all blurred together, the names seeming to mock him. Every house looked the same: neat lawn, friendly porch light, a car in the driveway. He was officially, completely lost. After what felt like an eternity of wandering in circles, he stopped. He had to make a decision. He looked at the paper again, then at the house in front of him. The number was off by one digit, but the color of the door was right. The little garden gnome on the lawn looked familiar. It was close enough, right? It had to be. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Mason walked up the pathway, his footsteps echoing in the silence. He raised a trembling hand and knocked on the door. He had no idea that this one simple knock was about to change everything. The door creaked open, and Mason was ready with his apologies. "Sorry I'm late. I got a little lost ... but the words died in his throat. Standing in the doorway wasn't his friend's mom. It was an elderly woman he'd never seen before. She had kind, crinkly eyes and a warm smile, but her expression was one of gentle confusion. "Well, hello there, young man," she said, her voice soft like a well-loved blanket. "Can I help you?" Mason's heart sank. "Wrong house?" He stammered. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I think I have the wrong address. I was looking for my friend's house." He showed her the piece of paper, feeling his cheeks burn with embarrassment. The woman, whose name he would soon learn was Eleanor, squinted at the paper under the porch light. "Oh, dearie," she said with a chuckle. "You're on the right street, but you're a few blocks to far north." Poor thing, you look worried sick. Just as Eleanor was about to give him directions, a man's voice called from inside. "Who is it, Ellie?" An older man, leaning on a cane, appeared behind her. This was Arthur, her husband. He looked at Mason with a curious but friendly gaze. "We have a visitor," Eleanor announced. "A young adventurer who's lost his way." Mason explained his situation again, about the school project, the dead phone, the setting sun. Arthur listened patiently, then his eyes lit up. "A school project, you say? What's the subject?" Mason hesitated. "It's a history project," he mumbled. "About the local town history." A wide grin spread across Arthur's face. He looked at Eleanor, a spark of excitement in his eyes. "Well, Ellie," he declared, "I think our young friend has knocked on the exact right door after all." He turned back to Mason. "Son, you've just stumbled upon the unofficial town historian. Mason was confused. He just wanted to find his friend's house, but Arthur and Eleanor insisted he come inside for just a moment to warm up and use their phone. Reluctantly, he stepped into a home that felt like a time capsule. The living room was filled with old books, framed black and white photographs, and strange-looking artifacts on every shelf. It smelled of old paper and lemon polish. While Eleanor got him a glass of water and plugged in her landline phone for him to call his parents, Arthur couldn't contain his excitement. He started pointing at things around the room. "You see that map on the wall?" he asked, tapping it with his cane. "That's this neighborhood from 100 years ago when it was all farmland, and that photo. That's the groundbreaking ceremony for the very first school, the one you go to." Mason, despite his anxiety, was intrigued. This was way more interesting than the boring textbook he and his friend were supposed to be reading. Arthur pulled out a dusty photo album and sat down next to him on the couch. He began to tell stories, not just facts and dates, but real stories about the people in the photographs. He spoke of the town's founder, a quirky inventor who tried to build a flying machine in his barn. He told tales of the Great Flood of '48 and how the whole town came together to save the library's books. Eleanor came back and sat with them, adding her own memories to Arthur's tales. She talked about the old movie theater that used to be downtown, where a ticket cost a nickel. She remembered the victory parades after the war and the annual town picnics in the park. For the first time that evening, Mason forgot he was lost. He was captivated. These weren't just history lessons. They were adventures. The people in the faded photos came to life through Arthur and Eleanor's words. An hour flew by in what felt like minutes. Mason had called his parents, who were on their way, and had also called his friend to explain what happened. But he couldn't bring himself to leave. Arthur was now showing him an old, leather-bound journal written by his own grandfather, one of the town's first settlers. The handwriting was elegant, the ink faded, but the stories were vivid. When Mason's parents finally arrived, they found him not panicked or scared, but sitting on the floor, completely absorbed in a box of old newspaper clippings, with Arthur and Eleanor looking on like proud grandparents. Mason's mom was just relieved to see him safe, but his dad was fascinated. He, too, got drawn into the stories. As they were finally getting ready to leave, Arthur said, "You know, Mason, that project of yours ... I think we've got more than enough material for you right here. Forget the textbook." He winked. "Real history isn't in a book. It's in the stories we tell." That night, Mason went home with a notebook full of incredible tales and a promise to come back the next day. The school project was no longer a chore, it was an exciting mission. He and his friend ended up spending the next week at Arthur and Eleanor's house, recording interviews, scanning old photos, and piecing together a story of their town that no one in their class had ever heard. Their project was, of course, a huge success. They didn't just get an A, they got to present their findings to the entire school. They told the story of the quirky inventor and the Great Flood. They showed pictures of the old movie theater and read passages from the settler's journal. They brought their town's history to life, all because of a wrong turn and a lucky knock. But the story doesn't end there. That chance encounter sparked something in Mason. He started his own history club at school, and Arthur and Eleanor became their official guest speakers. The kids would gather at their house, listening to stories and learning that history was all around them. Mason learned that sometimes getting a little lost is the best way to find something truly wonderful. And it all started with a quiet Sunday evening, a dead phone, and the courage to knock on a stranger's door. It just goes to show you never know what amazing stories are waiting for you just behind a door you didn't mean to open. The house belonged to Mrs. Grace Turner, a retired nurse whose reputation for a calm and gentle nature preceded her. She had a kindness that seemed to radiate from her, a quiet warmth that put everyone at ease. That evening, as the shadows grew long and the wind began to whisper through the trees, she was settling in with a book and a warm cup of tea. The sudden, timid knock on her front door startled her. She wasn't expecting any visitors, and deliveries rarely came this late. She assumed it must be a package left behind, or perhaps a neighbor in need of a cup of sugar. She set her tea down, her curiosity piqued, and made her way to the entrance. When she pulled the door open, she wasn't greeted by a delivery driver or a familiar neighbor. Instead, a small boy stood on her doorstep, his figure barely illuminated by the porch light. He was drenched from the rain, his clothes clinging to his small frame, and his hair was plastered to his forehead. But it was his eyes that truly captured her attention. They were wide with a fear so profound it seemed to swallow the dim light around them. He was trembling, not just from the cold, but from sheer terror. The boy, Mason, tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. His voice was a fragile whisper, barely audible above the sound of the rain. I think I'm lost," he managed to get out, his breath hitching on a sob. Grace, with her years of nursing experience, had seen fear in many forms, but the raw panic in this child's eyes struck a deep chord within her. Her maternal instincts, honed over decades of caring for others, kicked in immediately. She knew that questioning him harshly or showing any sign of alarm would only frighten him more. Instead, she offered him the most reassuring smile she could muster. Her voice was soft, like a gentle melody meant to soothe a frightened bird. "Oh, you poor dear," she said, her tone filled with genuine compassion. She opened the door wider, creating a welcoming path into the warmth and safety of her home. "Come inside. Sweetheart, don't you worry about a thing. You're safe here." Her words were a lifeline, a promise of sanctuary in the midst of his storm. Mason hesitated for only a second, his fearful eyes searching hers for any sign of deception. Seeing nothing but kindness, he took a tentative step across the threshold, leaving the cold, dark night behind him. Inside, the house was a haven of warmth and light. A fire crackled merrily in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and the air smelled of cinnamon and old books. Grace gently closed the door, shutting out the storm and the boy's fears along with it. She didn't press him for details or ask a barrage of questions. Her priority was to make him feel secure. "Let's get you out of those wet clothes first," she said, her voice practical yet gentle. "You must be freezing." She led him toward the living room, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder, a gesture of comfort and protection. She found a soft, fluffy blanket and wrapped it snugly around his trembling shoulders. The warmth began to seep into his chilled bones, and for the first time since he'd realized he was lost, a tiny bit of the tension in his small body started to ease. Grace then bustled off to her own grandson's old room, returning with a set of dry clothes, a pair of sweatpants, and a soft t-shirt that were a bit too big for him but were warm and dry. She pointed him toward the bathroom, letting him change in privacy, giving him a moment to collect himself. While Mason was changing, Grace went to the kitchen. She knew that a warm drink could work wonders for a troubled heart. She prepared a mug of hot chocolate, adding a generous dollop of whipped cream on top, just the way she used to make it for her own children on rainy days. When Mason emerged from the bathroom, looking much smaller in the oversized clothes but significantly more comfortable, the sweet aroma of chocolate filled the air. She handed him the warm mug and his small hands wrapped around it, seeking its comforting heat. They sat together in front of the fireplace, the silence between them comfortable rather than awkward. Grace didn't push him to talk. She simply sat with him, letting him know through her quiet presence that he wasn't alone. She understood that trust needed to be earned, especially with a child who was so clearly traumatized. She began to talk in a low, soothing voice, not about him or how he got there, but about simple, everyday things. She told him about the birds that visited her garden, about a funny book she was reading, and about her mischievous cat, Patches, who is currently asleep, curled up on a nearby armchair. Slowly, as he sipped the sweet, warm liquid and listened to her gentle chatter, Mason began to relax. The rigid fear that had held him in its grip started to melt away, replaced by a tentative sense of safety. He watched the flames dance in the fireplace, his wide eyes reflecting the flickering light. He still hadn't said much more than those first few whispered words, but the look in his eyes had changed. The sheer terror was gone, replaced by a weary sort of wonder. He was still lost, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, he wasn't scared. He was in a warm, safe place with a kind woman who seemed to understand exactly what he needed without him having to say a word. Grace could see the change in him. The boy who had appeared on her doorstep, a frightened phantom in the rain, was slowly re-emerging as a child. She knew the story of how he got there would come out eventually, but for now, this was enough. She had provided a sanctuary, a moment of peace in his terrifying ordeal. She glanced at the clock on the mantelpiece. It was getting late. Soon, she would have to think about the next steps, calling the authorities, finding his parents. But for a few more minutes, she would let him have this peace. She would let him be a boy drinking hot chocolate by the fire, safe from the storm outside and the storm within. She topped off his mug, and a small, almost imperceptible smile touched Mason's lips. It was a start. The long night was far from over, but in this small, cozy living room, a flicker of hope had been ignited. Have you ever felt so overwhelmed that you just wanted to curl up and disappear? You know that feeling when the world seems too big, too loud, and all you want is a little bit of quiet? Mason knew that feeling all too well. There he was, sitting in his living room, a storm of emotions brewing inside him, desperately trying to keep the tears from falling. It was one of those moments where everything felt wrong, and he felt completely and utterly alone. But he wasn't alone. Grace was there. She didn't need words to understand that something was wrong. She saw the untouched plate of food, the faraway look in his eyes, the heavy weight on his shoulders. Instead of bombarding him with 1,000 questions like what's wrong? Or why are you so quiet? She did something simple, yet incredibly powerful. She walked quietly to the kitchen and came back with a bowl of warm, steaming soup and a cool glass of water. She placed them gently on the table beside him. She didn't push. She didn't demand an explanation. She just created a space of comfort and safety. Then, with a soft voice full of warmth and understanding, she said the magic words. "When you're ready, just tell me what happened." That was it. No pressure, no judgment, just an open invitation. It was a lifeline in his sea of turmoil. Those words gave him permission to feel his emotions without having to perform or pretend he was okay. Slowly, like the sun breaking through a thick fog, Mason started to talk. His voice was quiet at first, barely a whisper. He explained the seemingly small mistake that had spiraled into a huge wave of anxiety. He had taken the wrong bus, a simple error, something that could happen to anyone. But today, it felt like a monumental failure. He got off at a stop he didn't recognize in a neighborhood that was completely foreign to him. He thought he could handle it. "I'll just walk," he had told himself. He pulled out his phone, trying to navigate his way back to familiar territory. But with every turn, he felt more and more lost. The streets started to look the same, the landmarks blurred together, and a cold sense of panic began to creep in. It's a terrifying feeling, isn't it? The feeling of being adrift, with no idea which way is home. His confidence crumbled with each step he took in the wrong direction. The world around him, which was just a normal neighborhood to anyone else, became a labyrinth of his own anxiety. Every corner he turned, he hoped to see something he recognized, but every time he was met with more unfamiliarity. His heart started to pound in his chest, and his breath became shallow. He felt small and insignificant, a tiny boat lost in a vast, uncaring ocean. The initial frustration turned into genuine fear. And through his whole story, Grace listened. She truly listened. She didn't interrupt with suggestions like, "Oh, you should have just called an Uber," or "Why didn't you ask someone for directions?" She knew that wasn't what he needed. He didn't need solutions right now. He needed to be heard. He needed to untangle the knot of panic and shame that had tightened in his chest. So she just sat there, her presence a steady anchor, her patient silence a testament to her support. Her listening was an act of profound kindness. It communicated something deeper than words ever could. It said, "I'm here with you. Your feelings are valid. You are not a failure for getting lost. You are human." It's amazing how much healing can happen when someone simply holds space for your story without trying to fix it or edit it. They just let it be. As Mason finished his story, a huge weight lifted from his shoulders. Voicing his fear had shrunk it down to a manageable size. The monster in his head, which had been roaring with accusations of incompetence, was now just a quiet echo. He looked at Grace, and for the first time that day, a real smile touched his lips. He picked up the spoon and took a sip of the soup. It was warm and comforting, just like her presence. It wasn't just soup. It was a gesture of love, a symbol of care that nourished his body and his soul. This story, as simple as it is, holds a powerful lesson for all of us. How often do we rush to offer advice when what someone really needs is our attention? How often do we fill the silence with our own thoughts instead of allowing someone the space to find their own? True support isn't always about having the right answers. More often than not, it's about asking the right questions, or sometimes no questions at all. It's about being a calm harbor in someone else's storm. Think about the Graces in your own life, the people who sit with you in your moments of struggle, who bring you soup, both literally and figuratively. And think about how you can be a grace for someone else. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is your undivided, non-judgmental attention. It's the simple act of saying, "I'm here, take your time. I'm ready to listen when you're ready to talk." In our fast-paced world, we are also quick to solve, to fix, to move on. But sometimes, the most effective thing we can do is slow down and simply be present. Let's all try to be a little more like Grace. Let's offer a warm bowl of soup, a patient ear, and an open heart. Because sometimes, that's all it takes to help someone find their way back home, not just from a wrong bus stop, but from a place of fear and loneliness. Thank you so much for watching and for being part of this conversation. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a like and consider subscribing for more content about connection and understanding. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had a grace in your life? Or have you been one for someone else? Share your story with us. Until next time, take care and be kind to one another. Have you ever had one of those days where everything just seems to go wrong? Well, for one little boy named Mason, his day took a turn he never expected, and it ended with a moment of pure, heartfelt relief that has touched thousands. It all started on what seemed like an ordinary afternoon. Little Mason was out and about, but somehow he got separated from his family. As minutes turned into what felt like hours, a sense of panic began to set in for his parents. They searched everywhere, calling his name, their voices filled with growing desperation. The park, the local shops, the streets they knew so well, he was nowhere to be found. Can you even imagine that feeling? Your heart pounding in your chest, your mind racing through every worst-case scenario. For Mason's parents, this nightmare was becoming their reality. They did what any parent would do. They called the police, hoping for a miracle. Meanwhile, not too far away, a woman named Grace was going about her day. She wasn't a police officer or a superhero, just a kind person in the right place at the right time. She spotted a small boy sitting all by himself, looking lost and a little scared. That boy was Mason. Grace approached him slowly, her voice calm and gentle. She didn't want to frighten him. She just wanted to help. She knelt down to his level and asked him his name. He mumbled Mason. She then asked him a simple question. "Are you okay? Are you with your family?" Mason just shook his head, his eyes wide with uncertainty. He was lost, and he knew it. It's that moment of realization for a child that can be so terrifying the world suddenly feels so big and unfamiliar when you're all alone. Grace knew she had to act quickly, but also very carefully. She needed to get in touch with his parents, but she also needed to earn Mason's trust. She asked him, "Do you know your mom or dad's phone number?" Mason looked down at his shoes, hesitating. You can imagine what was going through his little mind. Is this stranger going to get me in trouble? Am I going to be scolded? He was probably replaying the stranger danger talks in his head. Seeing the conflict on his face, Grace immediately sensed his fear. She softened her voice even more and offered a comforting smile. "Hey, it's okay," she said. "No one's upset with you. Not at all. We just want to make sure you get home safe. Your family is probably very worried and looking for you right now." Her words were like a magic key. The gentleness in her tone, the reassurance that he wasn't in trouble, it was exactly what he needed to hear. The fear in his eyes was replaced with a glimmer of hope. He finally, bravely recited his mother's phone number. Grace pulled out her phone, her fingers quickly dialing the digits he'd given her. She took a deep breath, hoping this was the right number, hoping this would be the end of Mason's scary adventure. The phone rang once, twice, and then a frantic voice answered on the other end. Hello, it was Mason's mother, her voice trembling with anxiety. Grace spoke calmly. "Hello, my name is Grace. I think I may have found your son, Mason." The moment those words left Grace's mouth, a sound of pure, unadulterated emotion came through the phone. Mason's mother burst into tears. It wasn't just crying. It was a flood of relief, worrying, and love all pouring out at once. Through her sobs, she explained that they had been frantically searching the entire area for him. They had looked everywhere, their hearts sinking with every passing minute. She confirmed that they had already called the police and a search was underway. They were living every parent's worst nightmare. The sheer terror they must have been feeling is something I don't think any of us can truly comprehend unless we've been there. Every second feels like an eternity. Grace listened patiently, letting the mother's wave of emotion wash over. Then, she said the 5 most beautiful words a parent in that situation could ever hope to hear. "He is safe. He's with me," she continued, her voice a beacon of calm in the storm. "Don't worry, he's perfectly fine. I'm with him right now." She quickly gave the mother their location and told her, "Come right away. We'll be waiting right here for you." On the other end of the line, you could almost hear the weight of the world lifting off the mother's shoulders. The panic was being replaced by overwhelming gratitude and an urgent need to hold her son again. She promised she was on her way, her voice still shaky but now filled with a desperate, joyful energy. While they waited, Grace stayed with Mason, talking to him about his favorite cartoons and what he liked to do at the park. She kept him distracted, kept his spirits up. She was more than just a bystander. She became his guardian angel in that moment. It wasn't long before a car screeched to a halt nearby. A woman jumped out and ran towards them, her eyes locked on the little boy sitting with Grace. It was Mason's mom. The second Mason saw her, his face lit up. "Mommy," he shouted, running into her open arms. She swept him up, holding him so tight it seemed like she would never let go. The tears were flowing freely now, but these were tears of pure joy and relief. His father was right behind her, equally emotional, ruffling Mason's hair and pulling him into a family hug that was a mix of relief, love, and a silent promise to never let him out of their sight again. The reunion was one of the most powerful and moving things you could ever witness. It was a raw display of a family's love. They turned to Grace, their faces etched with a gratitude that words could barely express. "Thank you," Mason's mom said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you so much. We don't know how we can ever repay you." Grace simply smiled. "I'm just so glad he's safe," she replied. Anyone would have done the same, but would they have? Grace didn't just walk by. She stopped. She engaged. She showed compassion and patience. She took the time to make a scared little boy feel safe, and in doing so, she reunited a family and ended a nightmare. She called the police to let them know Mason had been found, and the alert was canceled. This story is such a powerful reminder of the good in the world. It shows us that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they're just ordinary people like Grace who choose to act with kindness and empathy. It's a testament to the importance of community and looking out for one another. In a world that can sometimes feel cold and disconnected, stories like this warm the heart and restore our faith in humanity. It reminds us that a small act of kindness can have a ripple effect, creating a wave of relief and joy that is truly priceless. The image of that family hugging, of a mother's tears turning from fear to joy, is something that will stick with everyone who hears this story. It's a beautiful outcome to a terrifying situation, all thanks to one person's compassionate heart. Thank you so much for watching and sharing in this incredibly touching story with me today. It really goes to show how much of a difference one person can make. If you were moved by this story, please give this video a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming and inspiring content. Let us know in the comments below what you thought. Until next time, take care and look out for one another. 20 minutes later, the quiet street was suddenly bathed in flashing red and blue lights. The wail of sirens grew louder, and Mason's eyes widened in fear. He squeezed Grace's hand, his small body trembling. "Did I do something wrong?" he whispered, his voice shaking. Grace knelt down to his level, her expression soft and reassuring. She held his hand tightly and said, "No, honey, not at all. They're here because they care about you. They're here to help you get home safely." Just then, the door of a police car flew open and a woman scrambled out, her face etched with worry and relief. "Mason," she cried, running towards them. Mason's face lit up. "Mom!" He let go of Grace's hand and ran straight into his mother's arms. She hugged him so tightly, it was as if she never wanted to let go, tears streaming down her face. The police officers approached Grace, their expressions filled with gratitude. One of them, a tall man with a kind smile, shook her hand. "Thank you, ma'am," he said sincerely. "You did a wonderful thing here tonight. Thank you for keeping him protected and calm." Another officer chimed in. "He's right. A lot of people might have just closed the door or turned him away. You didn't." Grace simply smiled, a warmth spreading through her chest. Watching Mason reunited with his mother was all the thanks she needed. The next morning, Grace woke up to the familiar routine of making coffee and preparing for her day. She thought about the little boy and hoped he was doing well. As she sipped her coffee, her phone started buzzing relentlessly. It was a friend, then another, and another. Confused, she answered, "Grace, have you seen the news? You're famous. Famous. What were they talking about?" It turned out a neighbor who had seen the whole incident unfold from their window had been so moved that they wrote about it on a local community forum. They described how Grace had opened her door without hesitation, comforted the scared little boy, and waited with him until help arrived. The story was simple, but it resonated deeply with people. Within a few hours, it had been shared hundreds, then thousands of times. Local news websites picked it up, running headlines like, "Local woman shelters lost boy. Community calls her a hero." Grace's heart pounded as she read the articles. It felt surreal. By lunchtime, the story had gone from a local feel-good piece to a regional sensation. TV news vans, with their large satellite dishes, were parked outside her small house. Reporters with microphones and cameras were camped out on her lawn, all hoping for an interview. Grace, a naturally private person, was completely overwhelmed. She peeked through her curtains at the media circus that had taken over her quiet street. She never wanted any of this attention. When a persistent reporter managed to get her on the phone, she politely declined an on-camera interview. "I appreciate the interest," she said, her voice steady but firm, "but I don't think I did anything special. I just did what I hope any human would do for a child in need." Her refusal to take the spotlight only seemed to make her more endearing to the public. Her humility became part of the narrative. People weren't just touched by her act of kindness. They were inspired by her character. Online, the comments poured in. "This is what humanity looks like. She's the kind of neighbor we all wish we had. A true hero doesn't need a cape." The story of Grace and Mason became a beacon of light, a reminder of the simple, profound goodness that exists in the world, often right next door. It was a testament to the fact that sometimes the most heroic acts aren't grand gestures, but the quiet, compassionate decision to simply open your door. But the story wasn't over. That afternoon, there was a gentle knock on her door. It wasn't a reporter this time. When Grace opened it, she saw Mason and his mother standing on her porch. Mason was holding a bouquet of daisies that was almost as big as he was. His mother, her eyes still holding a deep sense of gratitude, was holding a freshly baked pie. "We wanted to thank you properly," she said, her voice filled with emotion. I can even imagine what would have happened if he had knocked on someone else's door. "You're our angel." Mason shyly held out the flowers. "These are for you," he said softly. "Thank you for the cookies." Grace's eyes welled up. She accepted the flowers and the pie, her heart full. She invited them in, and this time there were no tears of fear, only smiles and laughter. They sat in her living room, the same room where Mason had found safety just the night before, and shared stories. Grace learned that Mason's family had just moved to the neighborhood, and he had gotten disoriented while trying to find his way home from a friend's house down the street. As they talked, Grace realized something profound. Her small act of kindness had created a ripple effect she never could have anticipated. It had not only brought a community together, but had also forged a new, beautiful friendship. She had gained a new set of neighbors who felt like family. Over the next few weeks, the media attention slowly faded, but the impact of that night remained. Grace's act inspired a neighborhood watch program focused on child safety. People started talking to their neighbors more, creating a closer, more connected community. Grace and Mason's family became inseparable. She became like a surrogate grandmother to the little boy, often babysitting him and, of course, always having a fresh batch of chocolate chip cookies ready. Sometimes, when she looked back on that rainy night, she marveled at how a simple decision, a moment of compassion, could change so many lives, including her own. She never saw herself as a hero. She was just Grace, a woman who believed in the power of kindness. And in a world that often feels divided, her story served as a powerful reminder that the greatest changes often begin with the simplest of acts, opening your heart and your home to someone in need. It proves that you don't need to be extraordinary to make an extraordinary difference. All you need is a little bit of kindness. Thank you for watching. Today, I want to share a story that feels like it's straight out of a heartwarming movie, but I assure you, it's very, very real. It's a story about a wrong turn that led to the right place, a single knock that opened more than just, and a simple act of kindness that echoed far beyond a quiet neighborhood street. It all starts with a little boy named Mason, a new town, and the kind of mistake any of us could. Mason's family had just moved. Everything was unfamiliar: the streets, the houses, the faces. On his very first day of school in this new town, his mom drove him, pointing out landmarks to help him remember the way home. She showed him the big oak tree, the blue mailbox, and finally, their new house, which was the third one on the left after the corner. Mason nodded, trying his best to commit the route to. It seemed simple enough. He was a bright kid, and he was eager to show his parents he could be independent. That afternoon, the final bell rang. Mason grabbed his backpack, buzzing with the energy of a first day. He said goodbye to his new friends and started his walk home, feeling a little bit like a grown-up adventurer. He walked with a confident stride, humming He passed the big oak tree check. He saw the blue mailbox check. He turned the corner and began counting the house. 1, 2, 3. He arrived at the third house on the left, a cozy-looking home with a bright red door. It looked just like his. Confidently, he walked up the path and knocked. He waited, expecting his mom to swing the door open with a warm smile. But when the door creaked open, the face that greeted him was not his mom. It was an elderly woman with kind, gentle eyes and a cloud of white hair. Her name was Grace, and she looked just as surprised to see Mason as he was to see her. Mason's heart dropped. His confidence evaporated in an instant, replaced by a wave of panic. He realized his mistake immediately. This wasn't his house. The woman's expression softened as she saw the fear in the little boy's eyes. He looked lost and on the verge of terror. Instead of just pointing him in the right direction, Grace did something wonderful. She smiled warmly and said, "Hello there. You look a little lost. Why don't you come inside for a moment while we figure this out?" Her voice was so calm and reassuring that Mason's fear began to subside. He hesitated for only a second before nodding and stepping inside. Grace led him to her kitchen, which smelled of cinnamon and freshly baked cookies. She sat him down at her wooden table and poured him a glass of milk, placing a still warm cookie on a plate beside it. She asked him his name and where he was trying to go. Mason, munching on the delicious cookie, explained that he was new and must have miscounted the houses. Grace listened patiently. She didn't make him feel silly for his mistake. Instead, she treated it as a perfectly normal thing to happen. She then took out an old-fashioned phone book, remember those? And together, they looked up his family's name. But they couldn't find it. The move was too recent. Undeterred, Grace simply said, "Well, no problem. Let's try calling your..." She called the school, explained the situation, and was able to get Mason's mom's phone. While they waited for his mom to call back, Grace showed Mason her collection of vintage teacups and told him stories about her own children when they were his age. Mason was no longer scared. He was fascinated. He felt safe and cared. When his mom called, her voice was filled with frantic relief. Grace calmly explained what had happened and gave her the address. She assured her that Mason was perfectly safe and sound, happily finishing his second. Within minutes, Mason's mom arrived, her face a mixture of worrying and immense gratitude. She hugged Mason tightly and then turned to Grace, trying to find the words to thank her. Grace simply smiled and said it was no trouble. She was just happy she could help. She waved them off from her porch as they walked next door to the actual third house, their new home. The mix-up was that simple. Mason had gone to the house right next to it. The next day, Mason and his family returned to Grace's house, but this time, it was on purpose. They brought a large bouquet of flowers and a handmade card from Mason. On the card, he had drawn a picture of Grace's house and written "Thank you for being so kind." From that moment on, a beautiful and unlikely friendship blossomed. Grace, who was a widow and lived alone, suddenly had a new light in her life. And Mason's family, new to the area, found their first and dearest friend. They became incredibly close. Grace started helping Mason with his homework after school. He'd come over and they'd sit at her kitchen table, just like they did on that first day. She was a retired teacher, so she had a knack for explaining tricky math problems and making history come alive. But she taught him more than just school subjects. She taught him how to bake her famous cinnamon cookies. She taught him how to tend to the roses in her garden. She shared stories of her life, her travels, and her family. In every way, she became a grandmother figure to Mason, filling a space in his life he didn't even know was empty. Years later, when Mason was older and would tell this story, he'd always end it with a smile and say, "I knocked on the wrong door. But maybe it was the right one after." That one small mistake, that one moment of childhood confusion, led him to one of the most important people in his life. It was a connection born from a simple act of... But the story didn't end there. It started to spread, first through their neighborhood, then through their town, and eventually far beyond. People shared it on social media, in community groups, and over coffee with friends. It became a viral tale, not because it was dramatic or sensational, but because it was a powerful and genuine reminder that kindness still exists in the world. In an age where we're often told to be wary of strangers, Grace's story stood out as a beacon of trust and humanity. Her simple action of opening her door to a scared child, of choosing compassion over suspicion, resonated deeply with people from all walks of life. It showed that one small moment of empathy, one decision to help instead of turn away, can have a ripple effect that changes a life, a family, and even inspires an entire community. It reminds us all of the profound impact we can have on one another when we lead with an open heart. And to think, this incredible chain of events, this beautiful friendship that spanned generations, and this wave of inspiration that touched thousands of people, all began with a single hesitant knock on the right. Thank you so much for watching and for letting me share this incredible story with you today. If it touched your heart, please consider sharing it with someone who might need a little reminder of the goodness in the world. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next video. We'll see you next